You're one of the world's greatest nature cameramen.
That's very kind.
You have 4 Emmys and 5 BAFTAs, and now an OBE.
The real passion I suppose I had was when I was about 11 years old. I read Jacques Cousteau's Silent World as a book, and we started going on holiday to the Mediterranean. This was back in the early 60s, and of course the Mediterranean, warm, clear seas, mask and snorkel for sale on every corner, so it was natural to put one on and just have a look around. And I just got very much into underwater, into looking underwater, only in the Mediterranean, not particularly in the UK. But I was also interested in the sort of adventure books. Classic, young boy, I was only 11, 12 at the time, classic wee boy growing up, but I remember Kon-Tiki, as I say, the Silent World, other things, but also we were starting to go into space. And so it was a great era for exploration, but it was also an era of great imagination as far as what was going to happen in the sea. So I took this interest in snorkeling and things in the adventure side of filming, adventure side rather of the seas, and then went to university to do marine biology. Marine biology primarily because it was the least numerical of the sciences, but it was also the one I thought that was just all around you. Everything's living, so let's get in there. But it was also when, I didn't quite realise it, but biology then was just getting into ecology, so that rather than looking at individual animals and how they worked, we were looking at the whole systems and how they worked. And this was phenomenally exciting. I went to Stirling University, which at that time was a very young university. In fact, there were only 600 students at Stirling when I went. Hadn't even produced its first graduates when I went. So very good relationship with the lecturers who were there. And I got on really well with them. And it was just an exciting time to be in biology and also conservation. Conservation was just beginning to come in through the early 70s. And so there was a lot of things came together. And then, but while I did my degree, I decided I didn't want to be a scientist. I saw what being a scientist involved, which was number crunching, turning out papers, things like that. And that just wasn't really for me. I wanted to stick with diving. And it was odd because when I went to university, I somehow thought that marine biologists would surely be interested in getting into the water, but they're not. Very few of them could dive. So I saw myself as having a bit of a niche, that what I wanted to do was work with biologists on biological expeditions, collect the data, but turn it over to other people. So my first proper expedition, I went to the Red Sea in 1974 to work with some biologists from Cambridge University. And they had this platform that we built out on this coral reef. And this was so that we could study the animals of the coral reef for 24 hours a day. But you can imagine, having learned to dive and done all my diving up to that point really in Scotland, but in the Mediterranean, to go to the Red Sea and have this, be living on a coral reef was just amazing, remarkable. And that was where I first began to get into underwater photography. It's just stills. And of course, back in those days, it was tricky because it was film. So you would take a picture in the Red Sea, and it would have to go back to UK to get processed and then come back to you. So it wasn't exactly quick feedback, but I began to take some anyway. But then the real breakthrough was applying and getting a job with the British Antarctic Survey, which was in 1976. They needed a diver a diving officer really, to be on one of their research stations for a winter. And that diving officer would support the marine biological programs, would look after the equipment, would make sure that the marine biologists got the support that they needed to carry out their work. So I applied for that job and actually failed to get it. I've only been interviewed once for a job, and that was it, and I failed to get it. But simultaneously with getting that that letter, rather, you're unsuccessful, I was actually running a dive school in Jersey at the time. Another letter appeared from the Red Sea people who said, look, we've got a little contract here, can you come and do that? So I went out to the Red Sea, and then it was in February of 1976 that a telegram came from the British Antarctic Survey saying, unexpected vacancy at Signey Island, this research place, so can you go down? So in literally a month, I went from the Red Sea to the Antarctic and stayed there for 15 months. And that was where I began to get into a bit more underwater photography and things. But I really enjoyed that stuff that I did for the British Antarctic Survey. Came back, offered to do another session with them, another 2-year contract it turned out to be. And that was where it started. But then, another little twist of fate. It's funny, I'm talking to you and I'm thinking, some people say, what was your career path? It wasn't a career path, it was a path that careered from one thing to another until finally it ended up doing what I was doing. And the final link in the chain was actually meeting David Attenborough. He came to, I had just done 2 winters on this station, and I was in the final summer, and we had a phone call, a radio call from HMS Endurance, which was a Navy ship down there doing its, showing the flag. And it said, we've got a BBC film crew on board and they would like to come to your island for a couple of days. So we said, yeah, sure. So it turned out to be David and a producer, cameraman, soundman, and they were doing 5 weeks in the Antarctic on Endurance, doing pieces to camera for David's second big series called Living Planet. So I worked with them for a couple of days, and I was just felt it was hopelessly glamorous what they were doing. They were such a nice bunch of people. You know, there wasn't an ego in sight. They had a lot of laughs, and they were very open about how to possibly get into the business. But they also let me, reading between the lines, well, maybe not so much between the lines. I remember Ned, I think it was, the producer, said to me one night, he said, it's great meeting you, Doug, because I know lots of people that know Africa. If I want to know where to go for elephants breeding or chimps doing this, I can go to several people. But if I come back to the Antarctic, I'm going to come to you because you seem to have the clothing sussed out, you know the animals, you know the places, etc., etc. So he was kind of hinting that if I was to go into wildlife filming, then play to your strengths, play to what you know. So I basically finished that contract, then had a chance of another one with the Antarctic Survey, to go this time to a base where there was no diving, but there was an accessible colony of emperor penguins through the winter. So I was able to go, while I wintered at that base, I could travel up and down to the penguins, bought a camera, contacted the BBC before I went, and there was a producer who asked me to shoot some stuff on EMPs. And I brought it back, and that was really where it started. So it was, it was not a straight line. But the simple thing is that the first interest was diving, and then other things just got bolted onto it. You know, the marine biology, the decision expeditions, the university degree, then the Red Sea work, Antarctic, then photography, right at the end, really. But that was fine, because actually, if you want to be a good photographer, underwater camera person, underwater camera person, then the first thing to be is a really experienced diver, because when you've got that subject down the lens, you don't want to be thinking about any of the other things that could distract you, buoyancy controls, swell moving you here and there, or, you know, if you do some expedition work, I've been lucky to work on several climbing expeditions and things, you don't want to be bothering about maintaining your balance on the 40-degree slope. It's just all what's down the lens. So you need lots of experience, and I got a lot of that experience in the Antarctic, working with snow and ice and diving in the cold water. It is exciting. It's an immense privilege being given time in these wild places for you to spend time with the animals. And what I always remember about the animals is that there's a sort of double side of satisfaction when you have an animal close and it knows you're there. You're not working from a blind, a little hide, where an element of cunning will have hidden you from the animal. It's where, for example, with a polar bear, if you can see a polar bear, the polar bear can for sure see you. It's probably smelt you long before it's seen you, but it knows you're there. If you're in the water with a whale, you have to be really close. You have to be much closer than seeing that whale as a dim outline in the distance. You have to be about a third of the distance. So again, there's no way you're in the water without that animal knowing that you're there. Now that animal's got 2 choices. It can stay where it is, or 3 choices. It can stay where it is, suffer you, but be so antsy and on edge that it doesn't actually behave naturally. Or it can think, I don't like this, I'm leaving. A couple of beats of the flipper and it's gone. Or it can, okay, I can see you, but that's all right, I'm not bothered by you, so I'll just get on with my natural behaviour. So the big buzz is when that third thing happens, when the animal accepts you and you get into this bit of a relationship with the animal, and it gives you things, shows you things that you have needed patience and be given time and budget, etc., to be there in that position. And then it's just a case of, you film it. So it's a whole lot of people's efforts with yours added to the top that give you success. Well, it goes from everything from the intimate, of the privilege of spending a winter with emperor penguins, because they're pretty inaccessible animals. So to see them on their eggs or with the young chick, and I vividly remember making several trips up and down to the penguins through the winter, and then going down for one at the start of August, and it was really cold but very calm and still. And as I stood amongst them, I heard for the first time the tiny little high-pitched cheeping that I knew wasn't an adult. It had to be a chick somewhere. And you don't see much of the chicks when they're just hatched because, the emperor penguins incubate their eggs on their feet. They don't have nests. So they put the egg between their feet, and where they've got a featherless patch of skin, tuck it in there in the brood pouch, and then when the chick hatches, it stays in there next to the brood pouch. So sometimes they'll be cheeping from underneath the feathers, so you actually see them, and then this little wobbly head comes out, peers around, and goes back in again. And moments like that, and then on the other hand, when a whale, 50-ton whale, chooses to come up out of the perhaps not very good visibility, comes up and just stops next to you and you watch it. Or you're hanging underneath the ice in the most unbelievable underwater visibility down in the Antarctic, and you can hear these Weddell seals whistling and calling to each other, and then they come up out of the dark, out of the gloom, and swim up next to you. But I suppose, on the other hand, also, it's every camera person's holy grail is to film something that hasn't been filmed before. And I've had a few of those in my career, luckily, because if you work for big series are big and become successful because they go for new things. And these new things are difficult. The old things, easy things have been done. So they're difficult either because they're very rare or because the animal is difficult to approach, what have you. So I've had a few of those. And I suppose the one that really sticks in my head, which won on all shows, was when Doug Anderson and I, he's another Scottish cameraman, we finally filmed killer whales doing that behaviour of beating their tails and creating a wave and washing the seals off the ice floes. Now that had been, for me, I think it was about a 35-year, let's see if I can find this, because I first heard about that kind of behaviour way back in '76 in the Antarctic. And we looked for it, we kept an eye out for it. But to be honest, back in those days, there were not the number of killer whales on the Antarctic Peninsula as there are now. The whales generally, in fact, there's a lot more whales down the peninsula. It's a big success story, is the number of whales that are now going to the Antarctic Peninsula. But certainly I had tried previously to get that behaviour for a previous series, but we had been unsuccessful. So when Frozen Planet came along and said to me, do you think we should try again? I had a few little things that I had learned from the first trip, which I said, let's do it this way. And one of them was to have 2 camera people on it. Anyway, we came up lucky. And it was a bit of luck in it because, we were to try and find killer whales doing that particular behaviour. Actually, the more we found out about it, the more we sort of realised how rare it was. So filming that and getting it from all the angles, close-ups, slow motions, and Doug got some underwater with a pole cam, this sort of thing. So to be able to cover something as spectacular as that, which you can, 2 big charismatic mammals, killer whales, Weddell seals, you can build up the drama, you can get sorry for the animal, you can, and the behaviour itself was beautifully complicated, but you could see all the elements within it. So that was probably one of the biggest ones that I enjoyed doing. I think that, I'm an absolute believer that that's what we've lost, and that's what we need to bring back, is an awareness of the environment, awareness of how much we owe the environment, and awareness how much we can very simply change our ways to do less harm to the environment, to protect it. And that's my message when I go out to schools and things. I don't like to... I've learned that you don't hector people about do this, do that. You prefer to set a bit of example yourself and then encourage people. But I think at the same time, a large bit of that encouragement has to come from big bodies, whether it's Bristol Council or the government itself or all sorts of things. And that can come in the form of subsidies, whether it's for solar panels, stuff like that, but also for long-term big investments, which only a government can make, like deciding to make all our energy renewable, phasing out fossil fuels, bringing in the infrastructure that we need to make electric cars more possible, easier for people to use. All those sort of things. So it's at all levels that we need. But also it's, the biggest personal thing that I think people can do, for example, is, look at where this is to adults, look at where your pension's invested. And you will always, if it's with a bank, then, or it's almost, most of them end up somewhere fossil fuels are in there, or something that's not good for the environment. And so therefore move to areas of investment which don't involve those things, put the money into it, show what's happening, and so I think we can do all things at all levels. If I talk to younger people at primary school, the obvious one is plastic pollution, for example, because you can see that. They can do something about that. For them, they might be, climate change is a bit invisible as a concept. But as people get older, then you can help them understand these things. And it's not easy, it's not complicated. It's not easy, it is complicated. And there will have to be sacrifices, so to speak, made on both sides. And what's interesting is that I think it is finally dawning on people that it is going to cost a lot of money to move. But if we don't get that money up front and don't start spending on it, then we won't have the power to make decisions, because nature in the end is much bigger and more powerful than anything we can do. And I've heard it so often the last 5 years, 10 years, 30 years ago, 20 years ago with the Stern report, which was what Labour came out with. He said then, if we act now, it'll cost us this much, but if we don't, it'll cost us so much more. Same argument is being made today. So we need to lift that up. It's a bit disappointing to see how little, in a way, green issues are coming up at this election. It's a shame they're not more, at the forefront. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, there is nothing to compare with. We were on an island called Zawodowski for Blue Planet, first Blue Planet, and there's something like 2 million penguins live on Zawodowski. It's not a very big island, so the sound is just there all the time, and the smell is there all the time. So it's hard to the experience of being in a penguin colony just is a sensory overload in every sense. Your eyes are taking it in, your nose is taking it in from the smell, and your hearing, and all the rest of it. So it's remarkable. But if you go underwater, for example, I mean, the two big things, well, that you can't beat the whales. The whales are remarkable underwater. Again, one particular thing would be the belugas. Belugas, when a pod of belugas, you can hear them in the distance. When they are around you, it is like being in the middle of a flock of birds. They are chirping and whistling and squeaking and squawking, and the sound is just all around you. And interestingly, the one secret that I tumbled to get the belugas to hang around a little bit closer, longer, was to actually hum down my snorkel to make a sound, because I knew they were very audio inclined. I knew they were quite noisy whales. So I thought maybe if I become an audible object of curiosity, they'll come to me. So I'd started, I would just, you could see them away down, from the ice edge. I was working off the edge of the ice, so I'm on the frozen bay, and I've got open water in front of me, and I can see them coming from half a mile away, you can see the blows coming. So slip into the water with the camera and just float on top. You don't need an aqualung or anything, just float on the top. And you can hear them almost from that distance away, and it gets louder. And as they get closer, you start to hum down your snorkel. And then they would, often their first appearance would be underneath you, looking up at you. So what they would do is swim up, you'd be lying this way in the water, they'd come up from behind you, dive down, and then when they were underneath, they would roll on their backs. Because when a whale is swimming horizontally, the position of its eyes are such that some of them can see reasonably well forward, quite well below them, but not very well above them. So when they are underneath you and they want to look up at you, they roll on their backs. So that brings their eyes round. So you'd look down into the black water and these belugas would be underneath you, just swimming like this and heading up. And the other odd thing with belugas is that most of the other whales, the dolphins, because they have teeth, so they're dolphin-type whales, they have fused vertebrae in their neck, so they can't twist and turn their head. They have to turn their whole body. They have to turn their whole body. Belugas don't. Belugas can bend their neck. So as they swim away, they can look over their flipper to what you've got in the background. And it's the weirdest sensation because, no other whale can do that. So being with those belugas in the midst of the flock of whales was amazing. But also, everyone comes back to it. I mean, humpback singing can be, I've had them sing in the distance, but not so close that I could see them. But even so, they are so loud, it just sets your chest. You can feel it. And again, I don't know if you know, but they know that humpback whales are capable, certain frequencies of a humpback whale noise, if they are at a certain depth in the ocean, because the ocean has levels in it. You dive through the thermocline, different layers in the ocean. Well, if that whale is in a particular level in the ocean, then certainly in the days before the oceans were so noisy, a couple of 100 years ago, a humpback whale in the Caribbean, frequencies of the noise that it was making would be capable of being heard by a whale off UK. They would travel 3,000 miles, bouncing within the layers, certain frequencies, and they would arrive that distance away and still have enough energy in them to be detected by another whale. So all the whales could have been in contact with each other, bouncing their things virtually all over the place. Now, whether they can do that now with the amount of noise that there is in the ocean, I don't know, but so it probably almost certainly impaired them. And I mentioned early on, about more whales being down in the Antarctic than before, and it's because back in the peak of whaling, and the peak of whaling was even in the 60s, were taking massive amounts, they just totally wiped out whole populations that had the knowledge of places like the Antarctic. So the numbers of whales down the Antarctic Peninsula is many, many more than it was back in the 1970s, 80s when I was going to the Antarctic.
It's nice to hear.
Which is, no, it's great. It's great. Those killer whales, we're seeing killer whales now off Shetland. They're coming regularly to Shetland, but only in the last few years. Now, some of those sightings are because there are more whale watch operations going out, things like that. But it's not just that, it's because there are more whales coming back. And give it a few more years and people will have the Orcadian orcas more sussed out. They'll know the best places to go and watch them. They'll know where to go and do the hunting. And so sequences for filming that might have been impossible a few years ago will be getting more regularly picked off up there. And it's great, it's a good thing. Filmmaking for a while was, to my mind, it was just spectacle without much message. And that was partly caused me to move a bit more into presentations and talking and things like that. And also there was a while where I went and didn't work for the BBC. I went and did filming for a foundation called the Living Oceans Foundation, which was based in America. And they were very much into coral reef science, working in conservation with that. So they used to go to different countries and do coral reef surveys in those countries and then make films about those those missions, as they called them. So I filmed a few missions and worked with them and things. And I thought that was kind of getting closer to direct education, direct involvement with films. So that was always, you know, very satisfying. And then I suppose you find, you know, as you get older, and you know, I am getting older, obviously, you know, some of the producers that I worked with, they retired, moved on, and other camera people are always coming through. And so it was great working with my agent, who brought me more chances to talk at places like St George and at schools and all sorts of areas. I'm very happy to go out. And as I say, my message has really been to make people aware of the environment, the good things and the bad things, and then the simple things that they can do, from simply, you know, take home your litter, that sort of thing, to, if you're talking to younger people, you know, ask your parents, where do you get your electricity from? You know, and introduce them to enough of renewables that they can talk to their parents about. Can we not buy our energy from somewhere that just uses renewables, things like that. And then if I'm talking, it's quite good when you're talking to schools, actually to older schools. I did one for Bristol Grammar School the other day. I did an assembly for them. It was World Ecology Day. So they wanted me to do 15 minutes of talk at their assembly. So I spoke to the whole of their upper school. And I couldn't, it was only given 15 minutes. So I introduced the idea of first of all the subjects there could introduce an element of conservation, climate change awareness into it. So the English literature course, you know, asked them to read things like Silent Spring and one or two of the more recent you know, climate change books and things. The maths people could perhaps think about basic, very elementary climate modelling, concepts behind that, you know, etc., etc. The graphics, maybe the graphics people could think of, you know, let's dream up a name for a new Marine Conservation Society and design me a logo, that sort of thing. And then eventually at the end I said, you know, you've got a lot of talented people here. You could, for example, you could arrange a climate awareness course for your pupils, just one lecture a week, no exam at the end of it, but one lecture is from the English department, another one's from the biologist, and you just aim to give the kids, you know, the background of climate and conservation from the point of view of, you know, your subject. I said that'd be really interesting to do that sort of thing.